In this particular video, I will be going over the important concepts from Chapter 1. Obviously, this isn't everything you need to know. Your best bet is to check through the ALEKS software, and as you're working through those problems, there are explanations and videos, but this is just some additional information to help you. So first of all, integers are the numbers you see on the number line here. Positive numbers, negative numbers. Notice we're not working with fractions. Fractions are not integers. One thing they're going to ask you to do is compare using the is less than or is greater than sign. Well, numbers on the right are larger, and as you go to the left, they get smaller. So when I'm comparing -3 to -6, -3 is further to the right than -6, so that's the bigger number. So our arrow points to the smaller number. In other words, it would be better to miss only 3 problems on a test than to miss 6. If you're comparing +4 to -5, a positive number is always greater than a negative number. Okay, now absolute value is defined as the distance a number is from 0 on a number line. And this is in your textbook, the e-text. And the symbols for absolute value look like this. So if I have the absolute value of 2, it's going to be 2, because 2 is 2 units from 0 on a number line. If I have the absolute value of -4, it would be +4, because -4 is a distance of 1, 2, 3, 4 units from 0 on the number line. So absolute value is always positive because it's distance. Where you need to be careful is if you have something like the opposite of the absolute value of -1. So with the opposite, that means that my final answer should be negative. This is +1 because the distance that -1 is from 0 on the number line is 1, but I want the opposite of that. Some vocabulary you need to know: the term additive inverse. The term additive inverse just means the same thing as saying the opposite. So if you are asked for the additive inverse of 5, it would be -5. And sometimes they will use the word opposite. One thing about additive inverses is that when you add them together, you're going to get 0. Okay, on an evaluation, you may need to know how to estimate. So sometimes they'll say estimate the sum by rounding. So for example, if you have 173 plus 118 plus 250, and they want you to estimate that sum. Well, they might tell you to round to the nearest 10. So if I round to the nearest 10, I'm looking at the number that's in the tens place. So for this 173, is 73 closer to 70 or 80? It's closer to 70, so it's 170. Is 118, I'm looking at the digit in the tens place, is 18 closer to 10 or 20? It's closer to 20. So it's 120. Then for 250, I'm looking at this digit here. It's already rounded to the nearest 10, which is 50. Is 50 closer to 50 or 60? Well, obviously it's closer to 50 because that's what it is. So then you add these together. First add the ones. Then add the tens. 9 plus 5 is 14. Carry the 1. 2, 3, 4, 5. So 540. Now sometimes they'll ask you to round to the nearest hundred or hundreds place. So 173, we're looking at this digit here. Is it closer to 100 or 200? 173 would be closer to 200. Is 118 closer to 100 or 200? It's closer to 100. Is 250 closer to 200 or 300? Well, it's right in the middle. But if it's right in the middle, they always round up. So go to 300, add it up, and you get 600. So see, these aren't very close, but rounding, you're just trying to get an estimate. You're not going to get it exact. It's just trying to give you an idea if your answer even makes sense. Okay, now we're going to look at adding integers. So I'm going to go back to my number line. And let's say that I want to add -3 plus -2. So you can either use the number line, you start at -3, and then to add -2 means you go to the left 2, and that would give you -5. Or you can just use the fact that adding two negative numbers is the same as adding positive numbers. So add them like they were positive. 3 plus 2 is 5. Then put your negative on the end. To help it make sense, think of taking a test. If you lose 3 points on the first page of your test, plus you go to the second page of your test and you lose 2 points on that page, then altogether on your test you've lost 5 points. Now, if you have something like 4 plus -3, they're going to use parentheses around this number because it's a negative number, but it doesn't really mean that you have to do anything special. This just means 4 plus -3. You can either use your number line, 4 plus -3, which would take you to 1, or you can use the definition of subtraction, which says that subtracting a number is the same as adding its opposite. So 4 minus 3 is the same as 4 plus -3, and you've been doing 4 minus 3 since probably first grade. So if you can change adding a negative to subtraction, you can do it that way. Now, if you have something like 2 plus -6, you can use your number line, 2 plus -6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the negative direction, that's -4. But sometimes you might not be able to draw a number line big enough, so we need a method. Well, if the signs are different, like if this is a positive and this is a negative, you're going to subtract the two numbers and just ignore the signs when you do the subtraction. So I'm going to do 6 minus 2, and that's 4, but then I want to give it the sign of whichever number was bigger when I'm ignoring the positive or negative. So 6 is a bigger number than 2. So since 6 was the bigger number of the two, when it has a negative, you have to give it a negative. So even though -6 is obviously smaller, you're looking at them basically as their absolute values. You're going to subtract their absolute values, get the difference, and then the sign is going to be the number that has the larger absolute value, which would be this one, would have the greater distance from 0 on a number line. So if you have something like 24 plus -3, well, the signs are different, so I'm going to take the difference. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to do 24 minus 3. I'm going to subtract the two absolute values. I get 21. Then whichever number had the larger absolute value, which would be 24, it was a positive number, so my answer should be positive. Okay, when you're multiplying integers, if you have something like 3 times -4, multiplication means repeated addition. So what this means is I have the number -4 added to itself 3 times. And like I mentioned, if you miss 4 points on the first page of a test, you miss 4 points on the second page of a test, you miss 4 points on the third page of a test, you're down 12 points. So 3 times -4 is -12. So a positive times a negative is always going to be a negative, even if you have it written in a different order. If you have -6 times 7, a negative times a positive, always a negative. When one of them is negative and you're multiplying, it's negative because of the fact that it's repeated addition. This would be like having the number -6 added to itself 7 times. You're going to accumulate more negatives. Now, a negative times a negative, like -4 times -7, is always going to be a positive. And students will always ask, well, why is that? Basically, it can't be negative because that's what 4 times -7 would be. So if I had 4 times -7, that would be -28. So if I change the 4 to a -4, it's got to have a different answer, so it's got to be positive 28. So I hope this helps as you navigate your way through Chapter 1. Please remember to do all the problems on the ALEKS objectives and the homework, and if you have any questions, you can email me.